and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm Siobhan Holt, news editor at PRWeek and your host for today. I'm joined by our UK editor, John Harrington. Hi, John.
Hi, Siobhan.
In today's podcast, we're focused on one of the biggest events in the PR calendar. No, it's not PR360 or our awards. It's the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, which officially kicks off next week. So that's from the 17th to the 21st of June. For those that don't know, the Cannes Lions is the advertising, PR and media industry's equivalent of Davos or the Cannes Film Festival, and it's taken place most years since 1954. The week-long festival consists of thought-leading events, judging and winning of highly coveted Cannes Lion awards, as well as lots of other fun networking events and I think lots of glasses of rosé consumed by the French Riviera. But for this episode, we brought you not one, but two PR Lion judges. We are joined by Kat Thomas, founder and chief creative officer at One Green Bean, and this year's PR Lions jury president, plus Fenella Grey, another juror and former EMEA MD and chair, now senior advisor at Porter Novelli. Thank you for joining us, both of you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Nice to see you both. Right, well, let's kick off. Let's jump straight in. Kat, I'm going to ask you first. How does the process work for someone that's not aware?
Okay, well, lifting the lid a little bit, I suppose there's two elements to the judging process. There's the pre-Cannes stage, and then there's what happens in Cannes. So the pre-Cannes stage really is necessary because of the volume of entries. So I don't have the exact numbers yet, but the PR Lions tends to get 1,600 to 1,800 entries.
Oof.
And obviously that's an awful lot of work for a jury to review. So the way that the Cannes Lions organisers sort of approach it is to have almost two panels. There's a shortlisting panel that helps you review work before you get into the room. And then there's the in-room jury. And so for the last month or so, I would say, it blurs a little bit, maybe 6 weeks. Fen will be able to probably give me more accurate timelines, but we have had 2 rounds of at-home judging. And so you have a portal, which is very sort of well put together. It's a portal where you log into, you start reviewing work, you review it by subcategory within the PR Lions. It's very well engineered. That means that you have to look at all of the assets and the written submission and the film before you can score. So it definitely makes sure you get, the full immersive sort of reviewing experience. So the first batch that we've had was about 300, was certainly in my batch. And then the second round, which we had a deadline, I think, of midnight Sunday nights, for about 209 in mine. So I've probably reviewed 500-ish in total, which is why it's a very time-intensive sort of process. So there's a big piece of work and energy put into, I suppose, just bringing the pile down into a more manageable sort of lineup of work for consideration and review and discussion when we're in the room, which all kicks off this Saturday morning at 8:30 sharp. So we all arrive Friday afternoon, Friday evening. There's a sort of welcome and a briefing on Friday evening. And then it's straight into the jury room at 8:30 on Saturday morning. Breakfast, lineup of like croissants that get us all motivated and a huge amount of sugar. And then you're in that room solidly at least 8 hours, sometimes 10 as you get towards the pointy end, reviewing work, shortlisting, discussing, debating, gets quite lively, which is, I guess, one of my favourite bits. And then towards the midweek, we announce the shortlist, and then we go back in to determine what sort of takes home a medal from bronze, silver, gold, right up to Grand Prix. So it's time intensive, full on and all consuming, but a fascinating opportunity to sort of sit amongst peers from all around the world to discuss work and look at it from every angle possible.
How do you sort of keep focused when there's such a volume of entries to look at?
Fennel, I don't know how you've approached it, but I broke it down into batches. I'd probably do 20 to 30 a day until the deadline sort of crept up a bit. People all love a deadline and a bit of pressure, and then you might sort of lean in for an afternoon or an evening shift. But actually, once you sort of get in the zone and you're watching quite a few, I think it helps to mentally sort of benchmark versus one or two here, one or two there. I think it's nice to have a run of looking at different campaigns, and you can mentally just start ranking, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we were given very firm advice at the beginning, which was don't leave it too late, because actually it would be impossible and unfair to the work to not give each piece of work its the diligent time that it deserves. And actually, I think some become more naturally easier to sort of judge quite instinctively because you're more familiar with the work or more familiar with the culture. Where you need to spend more of the time is from sort of cultures and geographies that you might not understand, because you can't understand every geography and every kind of local nuance. So to really kind of get under the skin of those that are less familiar, those territories and brands, but that might not necessarily be so familiar to you, I think is where I certainly spent more of my time, where I wasn't clear up front or understanding. So, but it's been great fun and huge privilege and honour to be able to spend this time with the work and seeing, you know, what's defining great creative excellence right now and what's sort of changing the brands and the world and the communities that they serve in a better place. So it's been, you know, a real privilege and honour, I have to say.
How many jurors are there in total that will be working on it?
Helping us with the shortlisting, there's about 10, and then about 10 in the room as well. I think they've got a little bit smaller over recent years just to make it a little bit more manageable. I first was invited to be on the jury in, I think it was 2011, 2012. And it felt like the UN. There was about 15 or 18 of us around the room. And when there's a lot of people that have got a lot to say, that did mean some very late nights. So I do think they've sort of streamlined it a bit. And I think that's quite a nice size so that everyone feels a little bit more comfortable to be able to sort of chip in and take the floor and contribute, I think.
I was wondering if you've given any of the jurors any advice or what your style is going to be as president this year.
Well, I think one of the most fascinating things for me is that I get to vote in the preliminary stage, but I don't in the room unless there's a tiebreaker.
Oh.
Which I think is going to be quite exciting to be able to sit back and watch how the room sort of navigates the conversation about awarding without feeling the pressure of having to make a pointed contribution in any way. So I quite enjoy and I'm quite looking forward to that aspect of it. I suppose in terms of advice or conversations that we've had in our get-togethers before we've got in the room, the key one was sort of to enjoy it and to get into the debate. And I've never seen a room that's that quiet on the judging circuit. So I think once people warm up, they do tend to love a bit of chat. One thing that I think is important is that, and having been fortunate enough to be at Cannes a couple of times, is the tendency for the loudest voices in the room to be the Brits, the Americans, the South Africans, those that have sort of English as their native language. And so I think, as I chatted to the organisers, one of my responsibilities is to ensure that that isn't a dominant sort of voice in the room, but actually you're hearing from all of the jury, because that's why they're there, to give great cultural insight into areas and things that we wouldn't otherwise have any level of credible exposure to. So I think that's one thing. I'm very motivated to sort of be quite frank with people about leaving any obligations from a sort of network or alliance perspective at the door. We're here to look at great work and award it so. And I think that, you know, just to take the pressure off our collective selves to have to think about where work's come from, which agency did it, the whole process. You never know which agency is behind any of the work. It's not revealed at any stage. It's not in the portal. And I think that's great. It's very important to sort of maintain that. And probably the last thing that I'm always somewhat insistent on is, if a juror has a piece of work that is in consideration, is the expectation to leave the room so people can talk about it frankly. I have sat on juries in the past where people have gone, do you mind if I stay? I won't interrupt. But I just think that, you know, if people need to have a conversation about work that you're involved in, you know, scuttle out and give people the opportunity to do that sort of frankly. Certainly, I'd be straight out the door. I just couldn't think of anything more agonising. So I think it's just keeping ourselves on track and remembering why we're there is, I suppose, the job to do. But we shall see. And taking regular breaks for coffees, snacks and anything else that we need.
What do you think are going to be the big themes then running through some of the winning campaigns?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I think, and I'm interested to see what Fen thinks. It's quite hard to say at this stage because I've seen such a vast sort of volume of work. I would say there's a good balance so far between the purpose-led work and the sort of more commercial creativity, that side of things, which I think is interesting and perhaps reflective of where we are in the cycle of, I suppose, motivation around that purpose-led piece. For me, very excited by the humour coming through, that being a very specific category. And you can certainly see, I feel, work coming through that really leans into its own personality and doesn't take itself too seriously. Fen, what have you sort of spotted any themes or trends coming through yet? For me, it feels a bit early. I think once we get into the room, it might get a little clearer.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many entries to go through, but I think on top of the ones you mentioned, Kath, I think what also is coming through is, of course, AI is coming through as a consistent, whether it's kind of in visual terms, in production terms, or whether it's helped trigger, transformative insights, been interesting. So sort of front end and back end AI usage. I think women's sport, big theme coming through there, particularly football. Inclusion, obviously, naturally been front runner at Cannes for years, but real this sort of human stories behind an inclusion, and AI being a core part of that storytelling, actually, in many cases. I think, Kat, I was quite surprised also. Not surprised, I think we feel this, I think particularly as a parent in the world, but another theme coming through is sort of online safety and security, sort of digital literacy and awareness. I think is a sort of felt more prevalent, I think, certainly in the stage we're at, also with the judging right now. It'll be interesting to see what sort of themes stand out. I think humour and fun and joy, again, I think, was a big theme that sort of we felt, I think, all of us last year, and it feels really sort of prevalent again, both in sort of the pure play brand communications work, but also in the purpose work. You're not just seeing it exclusively on the commercial side, I'm seeing it wrapped up in some of these more kind of cause-related brand building campaigns too, which I think is an interesting intersection.
Do you think people are relaxing a bit more with purpose campaigns? Do you think there was a sense of, a few years ago, it was so serious and so earnest, and now maybe people are kind of, I don't know, maybe there's a sort of an endpoint in that approach to it, and actually you think sometimes humour and sort of levity can be a good communications approach?
I think it's sort of a common theme, isn't it, being discussed right now over the last year or so, has been actually, don't try and change behaviour with negativity, negative sort of scaremongering, fear factor campaigning. Actually take the positive. Change will come with more kind of positive reinforcement, more hope, more joy, more anticipation of the future. So I think that's probably coming through. I still think, though, Kat, I don't know whether you agree, that there are still quite a lot of cases at this stage which are seemingly purpose for purpose sake. And I think that's been quite a clear divider for me, certainly, thinking, look, it's a wonderful, emotive, beautiful, tear-inducing piece of work. But actually, if you look under it, you think, how's that relevant to that organisation? Is it relevant to that brand? It feels tangential and not particularly relevant. And I know that was one of your big mantras, Kat, coming into this, which was relevancy.
Yes, certainly in the purpose space, I feel, and this is me speaking, I suppose, personally versus in any sort of Cannes capacity, but I feel like 4 years ago, it was, we'd watch an incredible case study, box of tissues out, it'd be tugging at your heartstrings, you would look at these causes and you would look at the storytelling around it, and it was incredibly emotive. And there was almost, I guess, a value exchange for people in our profession to kind of offset their guilt by doing these purposeful pieces of work. And I think fast forward a few years, and we're now, the scrutiny is so much greater, as Ben sort of said. I think you look at purpose campaigns now and you just go, did it make sense for the brand? Sometimes there's a brand with a complete disconnect with a cause that they've suddenly hitched their wagon to, and you're like, what is going on here? Why is that the case? Does it make sense for their audience, or are they going to look at it and go, would never have put that cause and that brand together? Does it make sense for the world we live in now? And what did it achieve? Because I'm somewhat skeptical about, I think there's very few causes that need just awareness now, just raising awareness or pledging to be knowledgeable about X or Y. I think that purposeful work in this sort of day and age and in this era needs to really have effected some incredible change to be sort of worthy of considered purpose work.
I think last year at Cannes, there was a real noticeable drop in the number of purpose campaigns. It sounds like this year, it's maybe a slightly different situation where it's not like there aren't a lot of purpose campaigns. It's just there's more of a delineation between maybe the plastic purpose and the sort of ones that really work for the client. Would you sort of say that that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. From the work that we've seen in the 2 rounds, I would say it feels quite balanced between commercial creativity, not-for-profit type work, and then sort of purpose campaigns that blend the two. I think it's all to play for in, the juries evolve year by year. And I think the 2024 jury will have another point of view on recognition for purpose work and the scrutiny that I suppose goes behind that. I do believe there was probably guidance last year from Cannes Lions to kind of ensure that commercial creative doesn't get forgotten. And I very much do fly the flag for that as well, because I think we should all be proud of the work we do in that space. So possibly it's just there's been a sort of changing of lanes and changing of gears to just ensure that we recognise all work and don't just favour stuff that makes us feel good. So possibly there's just been a bit more balance in the last year or two.
A sort of final point on purpose, because I know we've been talking about it for a while, but I do think it's interesting. Obviously in recent years, we've had several of the big holding companies come under criticism at Cannes for their work with big oil companies, and obviously Havas is one of them, but by no means the only. I mean, do you think there's an argument to say this partly sort of explains the retreat from purpose campaigns, almost this sense of agencies and agency groups don't want to be accused of hypocrisy, or they don't necessarily want to put themselves out as a sort of purpose-led organisations because they might get a backlash? Or do you think this is overthinking it?
Perhaps overthinking it. I mean, it's not anything I'm that connected to, certainly not involved in. I've never sort of seen a scenario where a specific client or a specific sector then dictates the rest of the work of the agency, the group, or the network. Possibly there's some reputation management work to be done by the people in the right places to land what they're doing in the most credible way. But I'm not sure your client mix or portfolio impacts more widely the type of work you're doing or talking about.
No, I think there's genuinely over the last year or so, hasn't there, with Unilever changing its tack on purpose and things. I think there's been, rightly so, more scrutiny with regards to where brands should play. And it comes back to this point about, I think at Cannes we're about celebrating creativity and creative excellence. I think what certainly I'm coming into Cannes thinking about is sort of creative relevancy, and whether that's got purpose attached to it in some way is one thing, but actually it's all about impact, really, how that creative is impacting that business, that audience, culture, potentially society as well, but you don't have to tick all of those boxes. So I think there is a slight kind of watch out with lots of brands and organisations rightly thinking about whether to go down the purpose route. And sometimes, chocolate bar is just a chocolate bar. It doesn't need to be doing something else to save the world at the same time. So I think there's just better sort of selection process potentially around when to play a more purposeful card than not. But, in my book, purpose is just as much about growth and commercial and business success with simultaneous sort of positive impact in other territories, impacting that audience, including the planet, in a positive way. So I don't know, we could get into what is purpose, what is the definition of purpose, what isn't. I think rightly so there's sort of greater care about entering that ground, because it's very easy to be shot down and say too much and not be doing enough underneath it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would say it's an opportunity to shine as well. If you do operate in categories that have some reputational risk associated with them, if you are pushing an agenda around renewable energy, then this is the opportunity to showcase groundbreaking, creative thinking, world firsts. So I speak with no knowledge of what any of the holding groups do in that space, really, because it's not something that touches our business, but it is a vehicle to showcase progress. So I'd be interested to see if anyone actually did come forward and look at Cannes as an opportunity to show the work they're doing in renewables, sustainability, proper sort of pointy end innovation stuff. So we shall see.
And following on then from that, in your view then, how do you think overall PR firms are going to fare then in the PR lines this year compared to previous?
Crystal balling again a little bit, but as I said, we don't really have any insight into when you're reviewing work, whether it's from an ad agency, a PR agency, or any other kind of agency. My hunch is that it will continue to be a category that is somewhat dominated by ad agencies, integrated campaigns. And I think there's a number of reasons behind that. I don't think you'll see a reversal on that trend. You've certainly seen that over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, if not more. I think there's a number of factors around that. The biggest one for me is scale, because if you are unleashing a campaign, be that in a local market level, be that you're in a European sense, or be that globally, scale offers and delivers momentum to some extent. When you're looking at work that is integrated, when you're looking at work that has a big sort of back-end advertising machine plugged into it, you're really having to scrutinize it for whether there's an earned idea at the heart of it or not. But it certainly makes it a very grey area and dilutes discussion around, is this advertising, is this PR, is this the grey area in between? But the sense of scale and momentum achieved by fully integrated big budget campaigns definitely sort of push them further into your consciousness, and certainly in the jury room too. Another observation I would make, and again speaking personally really, is that I think there could be more representation, certainly from UK agency landscape. I think people are somewhat resistant to entering their work into Cannes, and I don't know one specific reason why, but I do have conversations with sort of peers and agency heads, and some tell me that it's just a matter of principle because of the cost involved. Some tell me that they just don't feel it's a level playing field. But I do, when I am sort of looking at the work, if there's something British and I recognise it, I react to that. But there's quite few comparatively. I mean, that may change because I haven't seen everything as part of the prejudging process. But I do think a good sector of the UK landscape, PR agency-wise, doesn't choose to enter Cannes. I think there are perhaps some players that are very big on the domestic awards circuit, but don't lean into Cannes in the same way. And why that is, possibly, the cost and the craft I always think about. It's very expensive to enter. It's also very expensive to make a world-class case study film, and the craft that goes into it. I'm sure Fenella agrees. Some of these films you look at, they're like 2-minute documentaries of a caliber that you could watch on Netflix. The craft and the polish that goes into some of these films. Someone sat in an edit suite probably for 2 weeks straight to make these type of case study films.
The art of PR that is storytelling, and we're brilliant at it for our clients. We don't invest as much for ourselves for telling our campaign stories. And you can really sense the big budget production entries. And ultimately it is the film, certainly the 15, 21st seconds of the film that catches you immediately, because that's the instinctive reaction. And I think a lot of the PR agencies have traditionally thought actually it's not worth putting together that kind of high ticket item for us, sort of the gamble of potentially winning or not. I think the other thing I'd like to say about it though as well is that I think a classical PR agency submission sometimes veers towards, and I'm being generalist for the sake of it, or to prove a point, sort of focus on the sort of the tactical end and a sort of one moment in time end, as opposed to a very stretched long-term campaign that goes beyond, hitting a particular consumer group, but goes into how it, changes legislation, or, appeals to a variety of different investors, or, really engages and galvanizes employees in a sort of fully rounded in a 360 sense. And I know we all do that work. We just don't necessarily pull it together or put it forward for Cannes because we don't think of it in selling ourselves in that way, which seems a ridiculous thing to say, but I think it feels true in what I've seen so far in the submissions.
When people say that it isn't a fair playing field, what do you both say back to that as a challenge? Do you agree, or would you say no, actually, these reasons why?
I mean, no one really has said to me or made that comment specifically, it's not a level playing field as such. If I think about the conversations I've had with UK agency heads around Cannes, and I'm not going to name names, there's a couple that have done such great work this year, and I was like, can't wait to see that pop up. And they're like, we're not entering. It's too expensive. We can't put together that kind of level or quality of film. I think that's disappointing. I think we perhaps need to sort of move on about the them and us. Is it from an ad agency? Is it from a PR agency? I think both sectors or industries have very distinct capabilities and strengths in that storytelling piece. I think, ad agencies, building on what Fen was saying, these people have been learning the craft of telling a compelling story visually in a 30-second execution for decades. And as Fen said, the first 20 or 30 seconds of a case study video, and you're in or you're not, the skills that are required in that are much more bedded into the traditional sort of advertising, I suppose, makeup of an agency versus the more traditional leaning PR agency. Of course, that's changing. I don't feel that PR agencies should have any sort of special privileges today around the craft aspect. The only thing I think would be interesting is the budget and the investment level side of things, because I think that sometimes we're comparing a campaign that had 50 million, 100 million in terms of investment with something that had, if I think about the low budget sort of category, 20 grand. It sort of doesn't feel like you're comparing apples with apples. So that's where I think that the sort of complexity comes in. And I think that we as jurors have a responsibility to not just get swept away in the big budget, big ticket, epic blockbuster campaigns, but to actually look at the creative craft in the lower budget, in the sort of smaller tactical pieces. I think that there's going to be creativity everywhere. I do think, Fen, we haven't even had a chance to talk about this. I do think one of the perhaps complex discussions we might have is going to be around the Super Bowl, because I find that very hard to navigate, the whole phenomenon of the Super Bowl. Obviously, we're not familiar with it as a home market, but we are very familiar with the Super Bowl. And is that advertising first? Are those ideas geared to have sort of that earned creative idea at the heart of them, or are they just flexing scale, quite often celebrity, quite often a whole lineup of A-list celebrities? I just don't know what the answers are, and I do wonder if we'll get into that. The only comparison I can draw is the way that our landscape in the UK sort of we all go nuts for Christmas ads, and suddenly, the Christmas ads are dominating the front pages of all of our sort of papers and news sites, and we're all talking about the Christmas ads. So that's the only parallel I can draw. But then I do sort of circle back to, they are generally advertising that have momentum and talkability because of the time of year, and it's sort of become a tradition.
Nail on the head. And I don't think that's a geographical discrepancy. I think that's, is it an ad that's amplified through earned, or does that matter because it's generating scale of earned because it's got the platform? But what I think has been interesting and exciting around Super Bowl, and I think as a theme elsewhere as well, is the sort of speed of response. So the campaigns or ideas that are kind of generated on the back of a really quick insight, and then coming up with a campaign in real time, 24/7 response into something that's come out of the Super Bowl, that was spotted at the Super Bowl, or somebody said, that's led to new products within kind of a week or two, that's gone stratospheric, has been really exciting actually. So that responding at the speed of culture, not just in terms of comms but right the way through the product, I think has been brilliant. And I would say that is earned first, because that's somebody pulling out an insight that hasn't had any advertising backspend, that's just been led by somebody who's been on it, whether it's AI generated or whether it's been a human spotting something to kind of leverage and generate a great kind of campaign on the back of. So I think that's been quite exciting.
This year there is an AI disclaimer, a compulsory question asking entrants to disclose whether it's been used in the work, and if so, how. And I was just wondering how you're monitoring that.
So we've had some guidance and acknowledgement around AI and that sort of evolving landscape from Cannes Lions, and it will feature, I think, quite heavily for our in-room briefing when we're getting into reviewing the shortlist and then getting into judging. I suppose my take on it at this stage is just essentially really going to be about increased scrutiny. It's going to be key for us to look at work. I always bring a sensible dose of sort of skepticism and cynicism about whether things happened, whether things have been embellished. And so I think there will be a fair bit of scrutiny on, did this happen? Did it happen in the way that it's sort of been portrayed? Google, in jury rooms for years, people whip out their phones and Google something, and you very quickly smell a rat for something that just doesn't feel right. And so a lot of in the moment real-time fact checking goes on, and Cannes will also have someone in the room with us 24/7. Hopefully we won't be in the room 24/7, but who will be dedicated to the fact-checking piece. My guidance for the jury will be, if this doesn't feel right, if something feels off, let's lift the lid on it. We can contact the agency team, but we also, with Cannes Lions, you have to provide the contact details of the key client who signed this work off. So I think that there'd be no hesitation to reach out, verify, fact check. So I think for me at this stage, it's about sense check, that kind of gut instinct, that kind of human sort of tendency to scrutinize and have an alarm bell go off and then react to it, and then fact check, not just let it go, to then sort of really sort of scrutinize it. It's the landscape, obviously the pace at which AI is evolving. They are rapidly getting towards a point where AI could create you a case study video from start to finish. And I think, we have to have our eyes open to the tricks and the techniques that may enhance a case study film, which again means that we have to really dig a little bit deeper. What was the insight? Was it relevant? What impact did it have? Is the creative idea, does it feel genuine and meaningful and credible? And I think it will just push scrutiny to sort of newer levels, because I would like to think that we all have our eyes widely open for things that don't feel quite right.
Yeah, I mean, do you think we're likely to have any or many sort of AI-led campaigns as winners this year? And if not, when do you think this might happen, if at all?
It's early to say. And as I said up front, I don't get to cast a vote unless there's an emergency situation. So I'm not in the minds of all the other jurors. As Ben said, there's been some compelling work that has really sort of harnessed the power of AI in ways beyond the sort of stuff that's already hit the mainstream, your Mid-Journeys and that sort of stuff. But I think that there will be some. I mean, I've seen some very memorable, fascinating, jaw-dropping examples of campaigns that have, I guess, done the bait and switch and revealed how powers of AI have been used for good in an interesting way from a storytelling perspective. Will it dominate? Early to say. I don't think so. Creatively, I think it will show up, but I don't think, I wouldn't say, making baseless predictions here, I wouldn't say this is going to be the year where, there's a shortlist that is dominated by creativity that has harnessed the power of AI in some way. May yet be proven wrong, but I think it will show up, but I don't think it will be the dominant creative force.
So what do you think of some of the new PR line categories and updated categories this year? Obviously, we've got the one around humour and others that have been updated. What are your views on that?
I think it's really great that this year, corporate reputation, crisis in issues, public affairs is being acknowledged and recognised. And there are actually some brilliant, really exciting, sort of stretchable, expansive ideas in there. Yeah, I'm not quite sure why they're only open for PR agencies. Because you kind of think, actually, if we're playing on a level playing field and creative can come from everywhere, and we're, don't want to be on the back foot, I don't think, with regards to, PR agencies aren't winning the sort of major, PR Lions categories, then why are we excluding others from being within the creative excellence category within PR? But then again, that's me talking personally. It's just an observation, because I know it's new for this year. I don't know what you think about it, Kat.
I feel very motivated to fly the flag for humour. I was invited to do a training session for the Young Lions as part of my role this year, and I focused on humour and its role in comms and advertising. And as part of that, really sort of unearthed some quite interesting sort of insights. For example, a Kantar piece that showed that humour has actually been in decline since the year 2000. And it really sharpened into decline in 2008. And it's very slowly only really sort of creeping back into favour. And I think that's quite interesting. And we drilled into why humour sort of was out of fashion and now is coming back. And from discussing it sort of with peers, there's a few sort of aspects to it. Risk-averse marketers, people that are, really sort of putting their commercial hat on and purely their sort of commercial hat on. There's a nervousness now that they're even more so today around the risk associated with humour, about things blowing up, about brands getting cancelled, about social media ridicule, the cringe factor. So for me, I think it's the humour piece, I think is fascinating, because I actually think humour getting it sold into a client, getting it executed, getting it right, and ensuring that it's a big success, there's a hell of a lot braver than it probably sounds in, you know, this world that we live in today. So, you know, I'm very excited and interested in the sort of humour category, and the fact that we will have some dedicated time to reflect on that. And humour's so subjective, right? There will be people that the cringe factor will be huge for stuff that I'll just find hysterical, and vice versa. So, you know, I think that's a great sort of space to unlock a bit more discussion around.
Thank you to Kat and Fenella for joining us today. It was great to learn more about the judging process and their views on creativity in PR. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the podcast. If you are one of the agencies nominated for an award this year, we wish you the best of luck. Do check out PRWeek.com for our coverage of Cannes and all the winners. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then we'd love it if you could leave a review wherever you access PRWeek's Beyond the Noise podcast. This goes live every 2 weeks, but look out for our shorter news-based podcast, Noise in Brief, which comes out next week. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.